In this session, I am going to talk about Shakespeare's important sonnets. The five sonnets I am going to discuss in this session: sonnet number 15, 18, 29, 30, and 71. And as you all know that how important uh, the form of sonnet is in English literature, and at the same time there are two types of sonnets we have in English literature. One is Petrarchan sonnet and Shakespearean sonnet. As I have told you that in this session, I'm going to talk about sonnets written by Shakespeare. And we all know that Shakespeare is credited with writing 154 sonnets and which were published in single volume in 1609. And this paper, especially this topic, which you are studying under Hardcore 1.4, Shakespearean Sonnets and Criticism. Hope you are following my lecture, what talking about. This sonnet or this topic I have taken from Hardcore 1.4, Shakespearean Sonnets and Criticism. And here I am going to discuss about five important sonnets written by Shakespeare. One sonnet number 15, 18, 29, 30, and 71. Yeah, let me give you a brief introduction regarding what Shakespearean sonnets are and how different they are from Petrarchan sonnet. And you know the term sonnet and what does it mean? Sonnet is a 14-line poem. This you might have studied at your PU level or graduation level. So here as I have told you that I am talking about five sonnets. These five sonnets belong to the first series of Shakespearean sonnet because Shakespearean sonnets can be divided into two. One is Dark Lady series and another they talk about friendship, love themes. Okay, so the sonnets what I am going to discuss in this session, they belong to the first part of the Shakespearean sonnets. So these are the among 154 sonnets. The scholars or the critics, they are under the opinion, they are of the opinion that there are 30 important or famous sonnets. So in the tradition of courtly love, sonnets were written from a male lover to a female beloved. To go back to the etymology of this term sonnet and how it emerged in the history of literature, because in the tradition of courtly love, sonnets normally they were written from a male lover to a female beloved, as in the cases of English poet like Edmund Spenser and Philip Sidney, and both writing just prior to and contemporary with Shakespeare. So, although it is not clear to whom Shakespeare's sonnets are addressed, because it is usually thought that most of the first 126 sonnets seem to address a fair youth, his friend. Okay, or sometimes the people are of the opinion that this the first 126 sonnets that they deal with friendship and love, and the next from 127 to 154 sonnets it talks about what precious love, okay, and even genuine love. So the sonnets numbering from 127 to 154 can be considered as the Dark Lady series because whose identity we are unknown. So, while most of the latter sonnets were addressed to a dark lady, so although many of the sonnets use the conventional or rhetorical stances of courtly love, there is no way of knowing whether they are expressions of genuine romantic love by Shakespeare or of a particular person. Hope I am making myself clear. This is all about the background or introduction regarding Shakespearean sonnet. And let me tell you some a little more things about this. So the sonnet is a highly stylized and fixed verse form invented by Italian Renaissance poets in the 13th century. So the word sonnet derived from the Italian word sonetto, meaning a little song or a small song. So all sonnets have 14 lines and follow a fixed rhyme scheme. So English sonnet feature iambic pentameter, which consists of five two-syllable metrical feet, in which the first syllable is unstressed and the second syllable is stressed. So this is I'm talking about the technical background or technical aspects of this sonnet. So I'm talking, hope you are understanding what I'm saying. This, I'm talking about the English sonnet and how it forms. And a sonnet, it develops a single sentiment or idea and generally has a clarification of turn of thought somewhere in the latter half, usually either at the ninth or the 13th line. So the Petrarchan sonnet, named after the Italian poet Petrarch, who lived during 1304 to 74, he divides the 14 lines poem into two sections. The first section, the first 8 lines, is called the octave, and which rhymes ABBA, okay, rhyming scheme. Then the remaining 6 lines stanza known as sesset, so which rhymes like CD or CDE EDE and CDE and CDC or sometimes CDE DCE. So in this type of sonnet, the octave develops a question always, or it poses a problem, or it may have a tension. Okay, so and then the set offers an answer to the question, a solution to the problem. This is how the Petrarchan sonnet goes like. Or the sesset, it it may release of the tension. So in the Petrarchan sonnet, the turn in the discussion or argument occurs at the transition from the octave to the sesset. So this turn of thought is known as the ulta. You should remember, this is for your information, okay? Just since you are studying sonnets, and you should be familiar with the background of sonnets and what are the types of the sonnets and a bit of etymological background. So the sonnet was brought to England by poets like Sir Thomas Watt and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, so in the 16th century. Sonnets written in English that follow this format are called Italian sonnets or Petrarchan sonnets. This kind of writing sonnets exist before Shakespeare was born. Okay, so or before Shakespeare has brought into the limelight. So this form of Petrarchan sonnets or Italian sonnets were introduced by whom? Sir Thomas Watt and Henry Howard. He was Earl of Surrey in the 16th century. And then these are the sonnets, even if they don't follow the exact Petrarchan rhyme scheme exactly, but still they were introduced into English literature. So, the English poets developed a distinct rhyme scheme in which the first three quatrains or group of 4 lines possessed independent rhyme schemes and were followed by a rhyming couplet. Okay, then I told you even Edmund Spenser and Philip Sidney, they were also known as sonnetiers because they had also produced sonnets. Let me talk about Edmund Spenser, how he used the rhyme scheme like ABA, okay, ABA, BBC, BCC, DCD, and finally EE. Okay, and Shakespeare rhyme schemes like ABAB, CD, EFEF, GGG. Okay, this is Shakespearean rhyming scheme. So normally Shakespeare's sonnet or his rhyme scheme became popular with subsequent poets, while some other English sonnets are Petrarchan in nature in that they possess an octave, alta, or and sesset, the English, and they are also known as the Elizabethan or Shakespearean sonnet or rhyme scheme, which lends itself to a structure in which the question or problem or tension is developed in the first 12 lines, and then the answer or solution or release from the tension which comes in the final couplet. What do you call as a final? The last 2 lines are called as couplet. Okay, even Shakespeare also follows the same scheme. Last 2 lines are called as couplet because Shakespearean sonnet has three quatrains. Each quatrain contains 4 lines. So 3 into 4, 12 lines, and the last a couplet. Three quatrains followed by a couplet, 2 lines. So some of Shakespearean's sonnets have the Petrarchan development of ideas with a volta in line 9, such as sonnets 18 to what I'm discussing today, 18 and 29. Others develop a problem in the first 12 lines and offer the resolution or solution in the final couplet, such as sonnets like 30 and 55. And still others, such as 73 and 116, develop a distinct pattern but related idea or conceit. Conceit, you know, who had used this term, conceits, in their poetry? Metaphysical poets, right? Conceits are far-fetched imageries. So even in Shakespearean sonnet, we can able to see conceits in each of three quadrants and then offers a conclusion in the final couplet. So sonnets, following the medieval tradition of courtly love, I told you how the pattern of sonnet had its history in the field of literature, right? And this sonnet, sometimes they follow the medieval tradition of courtly love, were often written to an idealized lady love or beloved, or to someone the speaker or poet admired. So, group of sonnets dedicated to a particular woman are called sonnet sequences. And if you go through Shakespearean sonnets, especially after 127, you can able to understand how even Shakespeare writes a sonnet like an ardent lover. Okay, then Petrarch wrote his sonnets to a woman named Laura. Petrarch, who was an Italian poet, right, who had invented sonnet form, he had dedicated his sonnet to a woman, a lady called Laura. So the 16th century English poet Sir Philip Sidney wrote his sonnets to someone he called Stella. Got it? So Sydney, he dedicated his sonnets to Stella. Petrarch, he dedicated his sonnets to Laura. So likewise, even his sonnet sequence is also called as Astrophel and Stella, whose sonnet sequence Sydney's. Sydney's sonnet sequence named to or is they were known as Astrophel and Stella, which were published in 1591. So Sir Edmund Spenser, even he was also not lesser than these poets, and also he is also a 16th century English poet. He wrote his sonnets to Elizabeth Boyle, okay, who later became his wife. His sonnet sequence is called Amarity. Okay, Spencer's, he dedicated his sonnets to his beloved, his lady love Elizabeth Boyle, and who later became his wife. And his sonnets were also called as Amority, which were published in 1595. So, in the case of Shakespeare, the most scholars believe that the first 126 sonnets are directed to a male friend or Earl of Southampton, okay, or Henry Ridley, his close friend, and who was also a patronage, who helped Shakespeare in many ways and who patronaged Shakespeare. Okay, so he the first 126 sonnets have been dedicated to his friend Henry Ridley, who was an Earl of Southampton and possibly a wealthy patron or wealthy person, sometimes known as a fair young man or the handsome young man, while most of the latter sonnets are dedicated to a mysterious dark lady, which means that whose identity were unknown even to his friends. And let me talk about the important concept, courtly love. What do you mean by courtly love? And this was a highly conventionalized code of behavior for noble ladies and their male lovers that became prevalent in the literature of Western Europe during the later Middle Ages. So its origins in Europe stem from the troubadour poetry of South France in the 11th century. See how it goes back. The courtly love, its etymological term. So it etymology goes back to 11th century, whereas troubadours were poet musicians who traveled primarily around France. So and in some instances, northern Italy, and singing about unrequited love and tales of knighthood. So the tradition spread from France across the continent and into Britain. There it influenced Arthurian romances, like stories about King Arthur and his knights. They were called as Arthurian romances. And the writings of English writer Geoffrey Chaucer. You might have read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, right, among others. So the courtly lover, or especially a courtly lover, is typically a knight, and the object of his love is a noble lady who is beautiful, graceful, and virtuous, but usually unattainable for him. because it was very difficult for him to reach to that noble lady. So this might be so because she is superior to him in social status. And how we have caste system in India, in British or European countries, we could able to find a class system. So, in to know about the courtly lover, his love, and since he was a knight, and his love towards a noble lady is quite unusual. So it was because of this class distinctions, it was very difficult for him to reach to that lady, but still he loves her so much, or he had such a sacred and pure love towards that noble lady. So this might be because of his social status, but she is already married sometimes, or because she is simply indifferent to the courtly lover. Still, the courtly lover idealizes his beloved, treating her as his sovereign for him, for whom he performs all sorts of noble deeds in order to impress her, even though he can never hope to actualize his love for this noble lady. So the fact that he continues to love someone to superior, love someone who is so superior to him and so unattainable works to enable him. In other words, her very unattainability renders his love for her more pure and virtuous. Even if she were to favor his devotion, her purity and his respect for it might prevent him from wishing to consummate their love. Because a courtly lover generally can never hope to consummate his love, he is eternally suffering. Because why he is suffering? Because he is not able to get his love or impress his lady love. Okay, but still he has such a genuine love towards his beloved. Courtly lovers were known to be continually sighing, weeping, trembling, growing pale, and finding themselves unable to sleep, as if they had a delightful disease. Okay, what kind of a delightful disease? Because there is a saying, no, everything is fair in love and war. So, though they are suffering, though they are sighing, weeping, trembling, but still they call it as a delightful disease. It's a disease. Okay, so it was a common conceit that a courtly lover would wander around at night, crying and composing poems or songs for his lady love or songs for his love. So the themes and imagery of courtly love are foundational, and it is a strong foundation to the sonnet tradition begun by Petrarch, okay, Italian poet. So his sonnets were likely written for a lady named Laura, I told you, and whom Petrarch had fallen in love with, but who refused him. Stella refused him because she was already married. And hence, Petrarch was in the position of a courtly lover, writing poems to his lady love in the hope that she might somehow read or can understand or hear of his feeling for her. So, the literary tradition of courtly love was revived in England in the 16th century when writing sonnets became fashionable in aristocratic society or in aristocratic circles. Got it? Hope you are getting my point. So it is conjectured that Sir Philip Sidney, like Petrarch, wrote his sonnets to a woman who had refused to marry him, Lady Penelope Durrance. And she was Sydney, especially like Petrarch. Even his sonnets were dedicated to a lady. Her name is Lady Penelope. So he named his sonnet sequence like Astrophel and Stella, which means the star lover or star. The latter being an appropriate descriptor for a lady out of a courtly lover's reach. Because why especially Sydney call it as a name, call his sonnet sequence as Astrophil and Stella, because it's very difficult to reach. Can we able to reach the star? So he calls her as star lover or star because it is very appropriate or it is very difficult to reach for his love. So Shakespeare's contemporary Edmund Spenser was an anomaly in that he ultimately married Elizabeth Boyle, right? The object of his sonnet sequence Amoreti, which was published in 1595. I told you. So I think I'm done with the background, giving background and a brief introduction regarding sonnet form, literary forms, and its etymology. And let me move on to the first sonnet. Now, what I'm going to discuss in this session today, sonnet number 15. So please go through these sonnets and you can able to enjoy the rhythmatic pattern and the literary devices Shakespeare uses in this sonnet. So in sonnet 15, its first 8 lines, the poet surveys how objects mutate or decay over time. And he writes like everything that grows holds in perfection but a little moment. So, in other words, life is transitory and ever changing, right? Can we expect the same kind of life? No, it's we have ups and downs in our life. So, in that way, in this sonnet, he talks about how we have our life is filled with ups and downs. So, even the youth's beauty will fade over time, he says. And can we be like this even after 20 years? No, and our beauty and our, yeah, our strength it may decrease. So like that he says that even the youth's beauty will fade over time, but because the poet knows that this metamorphosis is inevitable. Can we escape from being aged? No. So he says that these are all hard truth, and he says that this metamorphosis, being aged or the death, we cannot escape from death. So we call it as inevitable force. Like that, even the aging, it is also inevitable, and he gains an even stronger appreciation of the young man's beautiful appearance in the present time, at least in the present time within the sonnet. So, ironically speaking, then the youth's beauty is both transitory and permanent. And transitory because all things in nature mutate and decay over time, and it may diminish, and permanent because the inevitable aging process, because nobody can escape from being aged. So, which the poet is wholly aware of and fully aware of this inevitable force. So, he intensifies the young man's present beauty. Generally, the more momentary an object lasts, the more vibrant and intense is its short lifespan. So ultimately, this sonnet number 15, it introduces another major theme that will be more greatly developed in the later sonnets by Shakespeare. That is the power of poets' words to memorialize forever the young man's beauty. And he writes like this: I ingraft you new. I ingraft you new. Because the poet says at the end of the sonnet, by which the poet means that, however steady is the charge of decay, his verses about the young man will keep the youth's beauty always fresh, always new. That's why he says, I engraft you new, which means that I try to make you new every day, fresh every day, or young every day. Those that's the sonnets immortalize this beauty, and how Shakespeare wants to keep him new or fresh or young, because through his sonnets. The poet's sonnets serve the purpose. What kind of purpose? Because he says that my sonnets immortalize your beauty, and ironically speaking, that the poet's sonnets serve the same purpose as a son whom the poet wants the young man to father. So they perpetuate the youth's beauty just as a son would. So, in fact, the sonnets are even more immortal than a son. So he says, my sonnets are even more immortal. Immortal means there is no death, right? Even still, we are reading Shakespearean sonnets. So it's still Shakespeare is alive through his sonnets. Like that, he says that sonnets are even more immortal than his son or grandson, like that. So the sonnets continue to be read even today, whereas the young man's progeny may have completely died out, right? And just I would like to quote one important line here: and all in war with the time for love of you, as he takes from you, I engraft you new. Okay, so all in war with time for love of you, as he takes from you, I engraft you through my in my sonnet. So in these lines from this sonnet, the speaker declares war on time that seeks to rob the young man of his youth, right? Because in war we cannot promise anyone that the soldiers will come back alive. So he says that how war can seize or grasp the young youth. So, as with everything that goes, he will lose his beauty and vigor one day. But even as time passes on, and even as time wages its war on youth, the speaker words describes his beauty, give new life to the young man's appearance in the sonnet. This is all about sonnet number 15, and I'll move on to sonnet number 18. And as I have told you that these are the sonnets which deals with friendship and love. Okay, and these sonnets, what I'm discussing in this session today, they are all belong to the first series. The first belong to the first series of Shakespearean sonnet, where they depict or they portray the friendship, youth, and love. Okay, yeah. Next, sonnet 18. It also begins with the speaker asking the subject if the speaker should compare the subjects of beauty to that of a summer's day. Okay, shall I compare them? Okay, like that. So he says that can I compare the subjects of beauty to that of a summer's day? There would be no point in doing so because the speaker asserts that the subject is so far superior. There can be harsh winds in May, and summer does not last very long because in Britain or in in Britain, summer how they have a short span of summer. So that's why he says that there can be harsh winds in May, but summer does not long for a long time. Sometimes the sun is too hot, and at other times the clouds obscure it. Besides everything that this is beautiful at some points become less beautiful, and either as a result of a chance or the regular course of nature. But the subject's beauty, especially, it will never diminish, according to Shakespeare. Nor will it be forgotten when he dies, because he will live in this sonnet. And he says that eternal lines to time, these are the lines he just wants to quote, and how he can be alive and he can be immortal through his sonnet, like eternal lines to time. As long as people are alive and can read, this sonnet will keep the subject alive in the memories of people in the future. Is it true? Of course, because even we are reading and we are remembering whenever we remember Shakespeare, whenever we read his sonnets. That's why he says that as long as people are lived and alive and they can read this sonnet written by me, and it will keep the subject alive in the memories of people in the future. Of course, this sonnet possibly the most famous in the entire sequence, because which shows and which also follows the Petrarchan format, in that it poses a problem in the octave. In the first 8 lines, as I have already mentioned, the first 8 lines can be called as octave, and the remaining 6 lines sestet. This particular sonnet uh, follows Petrarchan format, and in octave it poses question or problem in octave and offers a solution in a sestet, the last 6 lines. So, although the solution does not become completely clear until the final couplet, the rhetorical question of the first line, so the first line invokes the long tradition of sonnet writers and courtly lovers in praising the beauty of the ladies they write about by comparing them to the beauties of nature. That's why he says, no, shall I compare thee to something like that? So, but for the octave or first 8 lines of Sonnet 18, Shakespeare's speaker makes the case that there is no point in this practice. There is no point in comparing someone to someone, because they are them. Like we, because I am how we can be, because so many people they don't like them to compare them with somebody else. And in that case, anyone can that matter. Then nobody likes that. So here Shakespeare also arrives at the conclusion that there is no point in this kind of practice by comparing somebody to someone else. So he comes up with four reasons why summer is not perfect, because he says that wind, stretching the definition of summer to conclude May, wind, brevity, heat, and clouds. So then he asserts that anything that is beautiful at some point becomes less at some point. And so in line 7, Shakespeare plays with the meaning of fair in using the word twice. And in the first case, it seems to mean that if we say that it is fair, which means beautiful, right? She is fair, beautiful, like that. We can take this term, this particular word, in two different meaning. One is he also uses this term twice in this sonnet, because case we can consider it as maybe a beautiful thing, but it can also mean that beautiful woman, right? In the second case it means just a beauty. So the cessate or final six lines of this Petrarchan sonnet begins with but, indicating the older author. The speaker has just made the case that summer is transient, but the subject possesses eternal summer, meaning eternal beauty. So, which is clearly unnatural. So, the reader at this point, especially we can understand, or we can point at, begins to detect a mysterious nature or a puzzle that will not be solved until the last few lines. So, the speaker here, he further asserts that the subject will not wander in the shade of the personification of death, meaning that the subject of the poem will be lost in the shadows of death. He will not be overshadowed or forgotten. And the reason he will not be forgotten is because he will grow in eternal lines to time, which becomes another piece of the puzzle and to be solved finally, especially finally at the end of this sonnet. And the couplet solves the mystery by asserting that as long as this, which is either this particular sonnet or the entire collection of sonnets, can be read and seen by men, then the subject will be kept alive. Now the reader understands that the lines mentioned in the line 12 are the lines of the sonnet. So this is how Shakespeare he tries to bring more comparison or more, and even to bring out the important thing, the beauty, and that especially the beauty and love. Okay, that even we can also say that how he wants to beautify the sonnets by comparing his friend or his youth to that of this summer. So, this self conscious reference to the words of the sonnet is a common motif in the sonnets of Shakespeare and other English sonnet writers. It is very common for a poet to write about um, the difficulty and the importance of writing. And indeed, Sir Philip Sidney's Astrophel and Stella, as I have mentioned earlier, it the sonnet, especially this sonnet sequence, begins with a sonnet that offers a detailed description of the process of writing a sonnet and how difficult it is to write a sonnet, and uh, full put in all your feelings or the important themes or the central conflict of that particular poem. So in the case of sonnet 18 here, what we could able to see that the message is that it is through art something created by humans, so that this immortal human being or this subject will live forever. So this attitude that art can outlive the subject. Okay, what kind of art he is talking here? Art of writing the sonnet. So he says that art can outlive the subject. Outlive the subject means who is the subject? One who wrote, one who has written this sonnet, or one who is or is the reason behind creating this art. So he says that art can live even after the death of its own creator. So the writer of the sonnet is characteristic of humanism. So humanism is key Renaissance outlook, reflecting a confident belief in the achievements of human beings. So just let me quote an important line from this sonnet. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long live this, and this gives life to thee. So these are beautiful lines, and in this is how the sonnet ends. This is called the couplet because the last two lines, these are the last two lines how this sonnet ends with. The final couplet of this sonnet 18 expresses a sentiment found a number of times throughout the sonnet, because that it is through the power of art, specifically this sonnet, that the beauty of the subject, especially the fair youth, will live on despite the destructive march of time. A consistent theme underlying this sentiment is that as much as the poet admires his subject, he transcends in his power to immortalize. And this is how he says that this art, how the art can outlive its own subject. Art can perish even after the death of the artist, like that. Hope you are understand. I'm done with this poem. Next, I'll move on to sonnet number 29. And here also we could able to see that the Shakespeare has followed Petrarchan form of sonnet and his rhyming scheme. The speaker describes himself in a state of despondency. Okay, when he is out of luck and despised by others, and feeling like a cursed outcast out of God's favor, he says, Shakespeare, he wishing he had other skills or wisdom of friends. So if he just accidentally thinks about the subject, then his mental state rises. So the speaker says that his mood becomes like the lark at break of day arising. To sing, lark means a boy. Okay, sorry, lark means a bird here, land means a boy. So the lark at break of day arising to sing hymns at heaven's gate. Just the memory of the subject's love makes him feel so lucky and wealthy that he would not trade his situation even to be a king. That's what this is what the sonnet number 29 speaks about. The speaker, again, in this sonnet, might be said to exist in the tradition of courtly love, in that he is suffering and his beloved has great powers of inspiration and comfort. And it is a patriarchal sonnet because the octave, the first 8 lines, describes the dilemma or a problem of a lover, okay, lover boy, and whereas he was able to find out the solution at the end, and with the second stanza, the sesset. And then the sesset, the last 6 lines, illustrate what brings him out of his sad state, his what mood, pensive mood, to a mood of joy. Got it? So in the first stanza, he was in a dilemma. He was in a dichotomy because he cannot able to impress and convince his lover, and he sometimes at one point of time he can able to see that his lover is not at all impressed by him. And then the last song, last section, we can able to identify it, which illustrate how he comes out of that pensive mood, especially the volta, or uh, which means what, that at the last section, which occurs as a typical in line 9 with the word "et." This is one of 3 of Shakespeare's sonnets in which the entire poem is a single sentence. So it's very unclear whether it is a real cause to the speaker's low feelings, but he feels out of favor with fortune and other men, because he, in the first stanza, we could able to see the speaker was grumbling at him, at himself, that he was not fortunate like other men who is enjoying with his with their lovers. But here, in the former especially, might be a reference to the Roman goddess Fortuna, who arbitrarily determines human beings' fates by spinning her great wheel. See how Shakespeare brings all this kind of mythology into his what sonnets. And if he uses one particular term, and if you want to know the etymology of that term, you can get a Roman history, Greek history, everything. Okay, so the farmer might be a reference to a Roman goddess Fortuna who arbitrarily determines human beings' fates by how Romans they used to what compare their moods, and they used to understood how their mood keeps their mood changes uh, every minute because of the spinning of a great wheel of the Roman goddess Fauna. The goddess is traditionally contrasted with the divine providence of wisdom. Since the god would not listen to his prayers, the speaker feels cursed and powerless. Because the speaker here, we have in the first stanza that I told you, in an octave, we think that the speaker is out of mood and he was in a low morality because he was of a low morale, not morality, because he thinks that he cannot God cannot able to listen to his prayers, so he feels that he is helpless and he is cursed and he is powerless, and he becomes envious of others art or skill or their ability because they are leading a very happy and prosperous life. So the lark in Elizabethan poetry is traditionally thought of as rising from the earth and singing to herald the morning. So the simile or comparison here involving the lark illustrates how light his soul has become at the thought of his beloved, as if he has flown from the earth to the gate of heaven. So the final couplet, the last two lines, discusses love in monetary terms, a recurring metaphor in Shakespeare's poetry. So this is how he writes. This is how the Shakespeare ends this sonnet. Let me read out the couplet. For thy sweet love, remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. Let me repeat. For thy sweet love, remember such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. So he says that maybe if he had achieved to the higher status or in monetary way or even in his position wise, definitely he thinks that his lover or his lady love may come back. So the final couplet of this sonnet illustrates the power of beloved to completely change the speaker's mood, because friendship between the speaker and the fair youth is an example of the platonic ideal of love, platonic love. It also illustrates that the poet's power to change the mood, a power that he perhaps cannot wield by virtue of his incredible physique, but that by exhibiting it in through his writings. He slyly claims himself to be his lover's equal. Okay, this is how the sonnet ends, and let me move on to sonnet number 30, where in this sonnet the speaker describes a moment of melancholy reflection in which he holds quote in his mind, and he writes like this. He summons up remembrance of things past. When he thinks silently of the past, he regrets for not having what he once wanted, and once again becomes sad about things that made him sad in the past, on in his past. So he cries for friends who have died and for loves he has lost, and he bemoans the absence of things that are gone. Okay, what he could not, he just cried and he just feels sad about losing his friend, and he's losing his past love, and even the things about uh, which he could not able to afford in his life. So he can once again grieve at grievances, and he has already gotten over, and he cannot recount them if they have just newly occurred. But if he thinks of the person who loves, especially he loves as he does this, he feels as if he has lost nothing, that all losses are restored and sorrows end. What he says, all losses are restored and sorrows end. This is how he writes. So, in this sonnet, especially in sonnet number 29, what I'm talking about, okay, the previous sonnet, just now I finished. In the previous sonnet, how that sonnet is addressed to a friend or beloved whose very being has the power to completely change the speaker's mood. This is a Shakespearean or English sonnet which develops a problem of quatrain by quatrain that is then resolved in the final couplet. Even in the previous sonnet, sonnet number 29, he had used Petrarchan form of sonnet. I hope I have mentioned it. So it develops a problem quatrain by quatrain, then it is resolved. The first quatrain uses a conceit or imaginary circumstances comparing his remembrance of the past to a court session in which the judge, especially, he summons up sad things from the past. And in the second quatrain, Shakespeare uses an accounting conceit like metaphysical poets to discuss the sad things the speaker is remembering. And especially in line 7, he mentions the love's long since cancelled now. Okay, the love's long since cancelled, oh, as if it were a cancelled debt. Okay, you know the meaning of debt. So in line 8, he mentions the expense of many a vanished sight. And in lines 10, 12, he says that he can tell about the sad account of things he had already bemoaned and new pay his debts. The accounting conceit continues into the final couplet where all losses are restored. So Shakespeare creates a somber mood in this sonnet, like his previous sonnet, partly through his use of alliteration and repetition of both words and sound. The sibilants, especially the sounds of S, okay, of line 1, like sessions of sweet silent, SS, okay, this is called the sibilants, the sound of S. And in line 1, we have sessions of sweet silent, evokes the sound of whispering in a quiet courtroom. Sad alliterative echoes resound throughout the poem. Sigh and sought in line 3, weep and woe and love's long in line 7. So in line 4, there is alliteration of the W sound. Okay, in line 4, accentuating the sorrowful words woes, wail, and waste. Okay, W sound, woes, wail, and waste. Where Shakespeare also uses his characteristic pairing of opposites with old woes, new wail. Okay, this is what he uses in line 4 with the old woes, new wail. The echoes intensify in each line of the third quatrain, where he tells grieve at grievances. See how beautifully he play with words like metaphysical poets, right? So grieve at grievances in line 4, in line 9, woe to woe in line 10. So for bemoaned moan in line 11, for bemoaned moan. Just I am telling all these words because you should be aware that how why Shakespeare has been applauded even now, right? And why since centuries he has been rewarded, awarded, applauded because of the usage of words and the beautiful alliteration scheme and beautiful rhyming scheme in his sonnets, and even the usage of terminology and the new vocabulary in his plays as well as in his sonnets. So for bemoaned moan in line 11 and pay as if not paid in line 12. So, but all sadness vanishes when the speaker thinks of the friend addressed in the final couplet. And as in sonnet 29, the mere thought of the beloved completely changed the mood or state of mind of the speaker. Here also, even in this sonnet, he says this sonnet ends like that, like how in previous sonnet number 29, just a mere thought of the lover, beloved, even the lover's mood changed. So, but if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. Okay, because even now, the final couplet of sonnet number 13 contains the volta or a twist in the sonnet and once again demonstrates the effect of the beloved upon the speaker or the lover as a complete reversal of the speaker mode which occurs in the beginning of the sonnet. Got it? And have arrived at the last sonnet, what I'm going to discuss in this session today, sonnet number 71. So, in this sonnet, the next three, and even after the 71, 73, and another, the next three sonnets, the poet's mood becomes increasingly morbid. Here, in this sonnet, he anticipates his own death. No longer mourn for me when I am dead. Okay, very beautiful sonnet this is, and he's this sonnet he begins with no longer mourn for me when I'm dead. From this wild world with wildest warmth to dwell. So the elegiac mood, the pensive mood expresses a sense of loss as much as for the poet's departed youth, departed friend, as for the actual prospect of death. So here you should know that the poet characterizes the world as a wild, VILD, okay, a strong condemnation of the age in which the artificial beauty is more cherished than the young man's natural beauty. Okay, so the beauty supersedes the character like that. So the poet asks the young man not to grieve for him when he is dead or even remember his name. So, never wanting to cause the youth pain, the poet is afraid that if the young man grieves for him, his woeful thoughts will replace any loving affection he may still have for the poet. So, because the young man does not appear to be as infatuated with the poet, or he had such a rapport with the poet as the poet is with the young man. Such sentiments on the poet's part is rather presumptions or presumptuous, especially when he adds, "But let your love, even with my life, decay." When he says that, "Let your love, even with my life, decay." And given the youth citing the poet the earlier in the sonnets and how he had lived so far, at this point it would not be unreasonable to ask what love the poet thinks the youth still has for him. Okay, just this question pop up in our minds that what kind of love the poet is expecting from the youth that the youth still has for him. So in the final couplet, the poet urges for the youth not to grieve for him, not to feel sad for him, not to cry for him, lest the wise world should look into. This is how even this poem, this sonnet ends with. Just please listen to me carefully. Lest the wise world should look into your moan and mock you with me after I am gone. How beautifully he says. Please, all of you, read this sonnets. Lest the wise world should look into your moan and mock you with me even after I am gone. This is how the sonnet ends with this couplet. So again, the poet is more concerned about the young man's reputation than he is about his own reputation. So again, just I would like to quote important lines. He writes like this: "Nay, if you read this line, remember not the hand that write it. For I love you so that I, in your sweet thoughts, would be forgot. If thinking on me, then should make you woe," which also appeared in the same sentence. Just I would like to tell you that what he wants to convey through these lines. In these lines, in sonnet number 71, the speaker explains that he wants the young man to forget him completely after he dies. As this might spare the young man grief, such a request reveals the selflessness of the poet. See, we all expect our friends and relatives to cry for our death, but here he has a unique characteristic that he is expecting his close friend not to grieve for his death, right, and forget him completely. And he also says that please don't be in a mournful situation during at my death, and you should not grieve for my death. Such a request reveals that the selfless of the poor speaker's love, he prefers the young man forget him completely and move on that than remember him and mourn for him, because he says life should and life should move on, and you should move on with your future. So that's why he says that you should not waste your time by mourning longing for my death, but instead you move on. Such a request shows that what kind of respect he had towards his beloved friend, and as he looks to care for the needs and well-being of his loved one even after his own death. And let me tell you what are the symbols we could, common symbols we could able to find in the first series of his sonnets, of Shakespearean sonnets. Flowers we have, okay, and even the platonic beauty, platonic love, beauty. These are the common things we could able to find in even in sonnet number 18. In acknowledging the importance of earthly beauty, notes that he writes, rough winds do shake the darling birds of May. Okay, rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. Here he uses the flower and how flowers will be afraid of the rough winds, and because rough winds will shake them out. So which highlights the weakness and delicacy of the flowers. So the speaker of the fair young sequence of the sonnets is always wondering how beauty can be preserved for eternity or immortality. And we have themes like the platonic love, the platonic ideal of beauty in this what where he gives he applauds or he praises the nature of beauty is prevalent. This is common theme in Shakespearean sonnets, and how he talks about the platonic love in this in his poems by describing by having the notion of fair. And sometimes this notion of fair, it seems like the complex idea that occurs frequently in the poetry of Shakespeare's. And he also talks about the two sequences, how commonly identified in these in his sonnets. And he also talks about the destructive time of March, right? Especially the destructive march of the time and destructive, what we can say, power of time he talks about. And we can also have that there is a little human being can do to the oppose the progress of time, then how the power of poetry. And through Shakespeare wanted to immortalize his friend and his love and even the beauty and even the youth. So we have symbols like flowers and trees and the stars, right? I have told you, I have discussed in the sonnets what I have taught you so far. So the flowers we can have trees, rough wind, stars, seas, and the weathers and the seasons. I told you, summers, where Shakespeare employed the pathetic fallacy or the attribution of human characteristics or emotions of elements in the nature or inanimate objects throughout his plays as well as in his sonnets. And we have important motifs in Shakespeare, common motifs in Shakespeare's sonnets, like art versus time, like how like other sonneteers, Shakespeare portrays time as an enemy of love, right? So time destroys love according to Shakespeare. Time destroys love because time causes beauty to fade. So according to him, when there is no beauty, no love. Okay, that's what he talks about, the platonic love and the complex term of fair. So he says time destroys love because it destroys beauty and people to age and it life to end. So time destroys because time causes beauty to fade, people to die, and even life to end. So one common convention of sonnet is to flatter either a beloved or a patron by promising immortality through his verse. So even we have he has a motive of like stopping the march towards death and the significance of sighs. And there are beautiful quotes when you go to Shakespeare's sonnets. Like in sonnet 18, he says that fair youth friendship sequence it is considered at, and he quotes about a fair young friendship. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. This happens in sonnet 18. This is how, especially in this thoughts, he says that This is somewhat like despising. Happily I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day, arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. It occurs in sonnet 29, where in both sonnets 18 and 29 he talks about the fair young friendship and young youth. Got it? Hope I made myself clear. If you have any doubts, you can ask me, and you can call us, contact us regarding your comments. Just I am looking in the comment box that somebody had mentioned sonnet number 15. I had discussed earlier. Maybe you were not aware of. And I had discussed five sonnets in this session: sonnet 15, 18, 29, 30, and 71. Hope I made myself clear. Thank you so much.